to review Zoom procedures?
No, we don't. We do have to have Aaron introduce himself. Aaron's
Okay.
online.
Hi, everybody. This is Aaron. I'm here. Sorry, I got my back to school sickness, so I figured I'd stay at home.
Thank you for not sharing.
Okay. Would anyone like to move approval of the agenda?
I'll move to approve the agenda.
I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Great. Comments from the chair. I did miss the last meeting, but I don't have any, I don't know if there's anything that I should know from the last meeting. Guess I'll just ask that in the space. But I assume you just went over zoning more.
Yeah, we just reviewed the chapter 1 changes that we'd made, but we didn't move forward with chapter 2 or anything like that yet.
And the thanks. It sounds like a bunch of you helped shepherd the approval of the region by the Regional Planning Commission of the plan forward. So thanks to those who participated in that. I don't have any other comments, so we can move to general business. Is there any comments from the public not about something not on the agenda?
Steve Whitaker. I want to point to something that's not on the agenda regarding the CDBG grants. There was 3 million, I understand, reserved of that for planning, but there's still nobody putting in a grant for planning for Country Club Road, and we're going to need it. So in addition to, especially in that the Recovery and Resilience Commission made a point of advising in the city plan that we should look for higher ground places that could serve in a disaster as a outpost, command center, place for vehicles, place for shelter, supplies pre-stocked, etc. That's a whole dimension of the plan that's missing. And Country Club Road's going to need a master plan. You're not going to get financing or TIF or anything. And you're not going to, without a traffic study. The Regional Commission's approval of the plan has been appealed. There's under section 4476 of 24 VSA. Unfortunately, the legislature, in their infinite wisdom, 15 years ago repealed the Council of Regional Commissions. And 4476 is still on the books saying I had 24 petitioners, among them the governor's attorney. So I gathered the necessary signatures to get an appeal in. ACCD has declined to appoint the regional review panel in the absence of the Council of Regional Commissions. So I've filed a what's it called? Petition for declaratory judgment and writ of mandamus today, so that the court will order ACCD to appoint a review panel. But the review panel cannot be from around here. They have to be disinterested regional commissioners or staffers from outside of this region with no political or financial interest in our plan. And they will do the work that y'all were supposed to do. Read the statute carefully, look at our plan, and see whether they meet up. So it would be smart for us to be applying for some of the planning money, CDBGDR or regular CBDG alphabets soup. But we should be planning to get a master plan done that's going to integrate the recreation with the housing, that's going to match the traffic capacity of that road. Wednesday night, the city council seeing the results of the VHB work proposing to spend $5 million to raise Route 2 up to more closely match the railroad in order to allow more traffic to get on. More traffic, or at least make it a legal intersection. It's not legal for any traffic with the unlevel distance that close to Route 2 because of the railroad. But it's very irresponsible, reckless even, to be proposing to spend 5 million where a rotary might be required, or signal, whatever, based on a traffic study, based on a housing build out, based on a master plan that we haven't even acknowledged that we need. So you're not going to blend a walkable village with housing and retail and light industry and recreation and potential homeless services without a master plan. And that's probably going to be what takes down the city plan and sends you all back to the drawing board on that, with the whole adoption process spanning into the end of next year. So that's a heads up of where you're at and how I'm having to do extraordinary measures because you didn't listen before.
Okay, anyone else want to speak? No? Okay. All right, update on planning projects in the city, Mike.
All right, so as was mentioned, we did get the regional approval of the city plan, and we'll see what happens with whatever appeals get in. Again, at every junction, there have been arguments this doesn't meet, and at every junction, it passes that it does meet. So we will see what happens. I'd love to have a third-party review, have another group come through and review and say it does meet this regional again. And I'm sure Steve will have some excuse why that doesn't go through, but we'll see how that goes. CDBG DR pre-applications that we discussed, we did get 4 of the 5 pre-applications were authorized, green-lighted to go through to full applications. The one that was not approved was the one for Country Club Road, because to put in infrastructure for housing, you have to have the developer on board to do that. So we met in August with City Council. I met with with City Council in August, and we're shifting gears on how we're doing that process now. So we're going to try to get a developer on board, so that way that would make us eligible for the February application cycle. So that's our goal at this point, is to the state wants to fund that project, and so we're going to try to go and get that process. So White and Burke will be at the next meeting on this Wednesday to go and start prepping the council for that.
Is there more of that money available? Or are they doing multiple bites at that?
They have 160 million for the 80 million that they have available, but they anticipate a lot of projects, in particular housing projects, may be in the exact same boat that we are. In other words,
So
they may have a developer, but they don't have the plans.
Okay.
In this case, we're trying to line up all the pieces and to take advantage of these, to take advantage of the funds. So they said, don't give up. They actually encouraged us, said, yeah, go forward, see if you can get the developer, see if you'd be get the timing right to put that information in, put those applications in. If not, we're also preparing Northern Borders grant. We've got a pre-application in on that to see if that grant, that's a smaller grant and requires a match. So we're putting the applications in to see which ones will go.
Before we move away from that, can I just ask about, so are they using the concept? Because I know the city council had like a subcommittee and they came back and kind of redrew what they're thinking. Are you putting that like an RFP out for?
We're going to put an RFP out to a developer.
Okay. What's the timeline?
Well, the hope is that it really depends on, and that's what the Wednesday meeting is all about, is how much process we want. We could very quickly get a RFP process out for 6 or 8 weeks to start, is it going to be a 1 round? Is it going to be 2 rounds? Sometimes you'll do a 2-round process. You'll go through and say, if you're interested in being the developer, get us some ideas, and then we'll select 1 or 2 because the final selection could take, would require more investment. And sometimes, you want to go through a pre-application process, narrow it down to a handful, and then have them go through and come up with more detailed proposals of how they would meet those requirements. And the funds we were asking for was, we were asking for about $10 million for the one that didn't get approved. For the infrastructure, it costs about $5 million, so there'd be some money left over to help subsidize the affordable housing project, or the units, which would be between 20 and 40 units of the 200. And the infrastructure that's going out there, so yes, it's a $5 million price tag, but it's not $5 million to elevate Route 2. It's $5 million to install water lines, sewer lines, starting at the roundabout under the river, Jack and Bore under the river, run those out to the Country Club Road intersection, elevate the Country Club Road intersection so that way it better matches the railroad. Then extending those sets of utilities up to the Country Club building, including fully reconstructing the road itself. The road is between 12 and 14%. It's not even, so we would lower it and even it all up to a 12% grade. Well, one of the proposals is we could lower it to a 10%. We don't think that's necessary. DPW doesn't think that's necessary. The 12% would help to alleviate some of the steepness of the road. It would make it better. We would also be adding a sidewalk. We would also be adding curbs. We also would be adding in storm water. And the intersection would be prepped if we wanted to put in a turn signal. If there was a need for signalization in the future, the intersection is prepped for such a thing. So it's not $5 million to elevate Route 2. It's $5 million for an
Does
entire
this part of it actually have some reconstruction of housing at the old Country Club building, like where we had our outreach meetings and stuff? Is there something in that phase, or is it just the road?
This $5 million is just for that phase, but to get eligibility for that $5 million, we have to have a housing project associated.
Which is
if we can get the developer to come on board and say, here's what we would propose, and we can get these constructed before 2030, we would have a requirement to build at least 20 LMI housing units before 2030.
And that's at that site where the existing building is.
It could be anywhere on that site. It could be, we're looking for a developer to propose. And my recommendation, again, this is to council to figure out what we're going to do. We could put an RFP out for the entire 30 acres of open space. My recommendation to council is that we just put out the RFP for that lower flat area. It's about 10 acres. And to see how someone would develop that area, how many units would they fit in, answer those types of questions.
How big is the whole thing?
The whole parcel? The whole parcel is 135 acres, but 100 of it is woods. And almost everything that's woods is pretty close to unbuildable. It's pretty steep.
35 acres, it's buildable.
Yes, 35 acres, that's
10 of it.
Yeah. And about 10 of it's down on the flat area. So, and about 10 of it's been reserved, 10 to 15 has been reserved for recreation.
So the process is the city council has to vote that out, that they're going to go down that road, and then you just put it out, and the goal is to have bids back by.
Yeah, it would be sometime in the fall. I mean, it also depends how much, and this is what David White from White and Burke is going to talk to council about. How much does council want to get into the actual, how do I put it, the RFP, the proposal? You can pretty much leave it open, or you could go in and say, we expect, all proposals shall have net zero buildings and be whatever.
So that'll be in the next few city council meetings.
Yeah, it would be the first meeting is just this one to try to lay out things and say, hey, what would you guys like? Because if you want just a basic open process, David White could put together an RFP, get it back to council relatively quick. If we want to have more conversation of what requirements do we want? Do we want to say no single family homes, or do we want to say only single family homes? Whatever those are, you can come in and make those recommendations.
Thanks.
So that's most of the update on the for the projects. We do have Matthew is on board in my office, so after 3 months of being short-staffed, it's really great to have his help. But we got to get him up to speed. But other than that, you know, he's kind of jumping in with both feet to get these grants in by the end of the month. We do have a grant writer for two of them, two of the CDBG DRs, but Matthew and I have to write the other two. So that will be.
What are the other 4 applications?
So, oh yes. So the other 4 applications that did get approved. So those 4 are one that John has been closely working with, the Pioneer Dam and Home Farm Way property. So we're going to remove the dam, and Home Farm Way is going to be, they're removing the building now. They're going to eventually go in and remove a bunch of fill to make that area a better floodplain. That project was already approved, is already approved by the HMGP, Hazard Mitigation Grant Program at the federal government. So we already had an 80-20, 80% covered by the feds, 20% covered by the state. And the state asked us to apply for DR funds because we can match DR funds. And that would free them up to use their money for other projects around the state. So it's a project that is happening. It's just kind of a little shell game behind the scenes. But that's one application. The second one is to remove the Bailey Dam next to Shaw's. That's one that my office will be working on. The third one is 3 culverts on Elm Street, starting, the closest one is at Stump Dump at Finch Road, right after the Nature Center. There's a culvert. And all 3 of these culverts are basically half the size that they should be. So that's one. Then as you go out Elm Street, there are 2 more before you get to Wrightsville Dam that need to get fixed. So all 3 of those would be a second application, would be our third application. And then the last application will also be written by our consultants that we hired, and that is mitigation of the water resource recovery facility, the sewer plant. So the reason why the sewer plant hasn't flooded the past couple of floods is that the road itself acts as a levee, and it is actually 1 inch below the 100-year floodplain. And that's really, really risky, because if the water goes over that road, it will fill in to about depth of about 11 feet deep in the sewer plant. So that would be catastrophic. The second issue is water coming in through the outpipes. So the effluent pipe, we need to have a bypass system. So that way, if water reaches a certain level, we can just shut off the sewer plant. Because we have CSOs, that lets flood waters into the in pipes and basically just washes out the system. So we have to be able to turn the in pipes off. We already have backflow preventers on the out pipes, but we need to turn off the in pipe. So between those two, that's about a $3 million project to elevate Dog River Road, bring it up a couple more feet, and put a berm on the one side to keep floodwaters away from the plant. And then there'd be a gate where that they could close for where the entrances are to the garage and to the sewer plant. So it's a highly high priority project. The state considers it a high priority project. So we feel good about those 2 applications, the Pioneer Street and the Water Resource Recovery Facility. We feel pretty good about those. And we tagged our professional writers for those. The other 2 need a little bit more work. We're working with John's group and the River Conservancy to get some additional help on support for the Bailey Dam project, which we think also would benefit. And because of the removal of the dam upstream, it would really be a double benefit if we could get that lower dam removed as well. So yeah, that's those are the 4 applications. They're all due at the end of the month, so we're pretty busy.
I have a question about, going back to the city plan, are there any other administrative steps that need to be taken before it is the official city plan?
It's already the official city plan.
Okay,
Yep.
So,
Yep, there's no steps. It is regionally approved, and if they're all approved and regionally approved unless and until a judge says so.
Okay.
So,
on the RFP, what is the thought process behind just planning out the 10 acres versus, it sounds like there's 20 to 25 acres that could be planned out? What is the,
it would end up with there's a road, so you're gonna have a road that comes up, and then there's an area, and then there's a place where a road goes up to these upper areas. So it's a distinct area, so we could bid the whole thing, or we could just go through and say, let's talk about, let's not bite off more than we could chew. Let's take this bottom part. If we get projects developed down here, then we're generating income into the chip. That's what we need, is to apply for a chip, which is just like a TIF, except it's a project-based and you need a developer. So we need a developer for the grant application. We need a developer for chip. If we're shifting gears from TIF to chip, and that's what City Council has said we want to do, then we need a developer. And so there's two reasons for us to get a developer on board, and the developer would come up with the plans and what they're going to build and how much increment that would generate. So then we could go through and say, okay, well, now we can start planning for phase 2 in the upper area, because we know how much money we have for infrastructure. Because if we don't get enough money in the lower area, then we're not going to have the revenues to extend the roads and extend the sewer up the hill.
okay, so the two areas are kind of geographically distinct, is that what?
Yeah. If you're out on the golf course, there's kind of, you get up to the country club, it's kind of flattish, and then you kind of watch it go uphill to these other fairways. And it's those upper areas that are kind of in phase 2.
Okay. And then there's the Northern Borders Grant pre-application, is that?
Yeah, that's just another grant that's been out. A number of communities have tried to get access to that. It's only for the states of Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. We've kind of held off on putting in an application for this, waiting for the right opportunity. You can get between 1 and 3 million for infrastructure. It's probably more likely it'll be 1 million. We're going to put in for 3. They can always tell us no and give us 1, but it's better to put in and see where that goes, and that gets you some funding and gets you somewhat moving in the right direction. And that would really act either to supplement the DR funds if we got both, or if we had to go at some point to a bond to build something out, then it would offset any bond that we would be using.
Which infrastructure projects would it go toward?
It's going towards the pipes and the road that we were talking about, the $5 million,
Country Club.
the Country Club Road. Yeah.
Great. So let's move on to number 6 if nobody has any other questions.
And we'll have John come up for
Okay.
number 6. So I guess I can just kick this off really quick. So every year, those of you who've been here a couple of years, every year, the Municipal Planning Grant Program, there's an annual cycle to go and apply for grant funds. We have applied for updating our zoning, updating our city plan. I think most recently we had one to help DPW do their pilot study on the road surface mapping, so they could do the the LiDAR mapping, which gives you the pavement condition index to PCI, so we can have a consistent measure rather than having people walk it and make evaluations. Let a computer use AI to make those calls, so that way it's consistent. So yeah, we've used these grants for a lot. This year we don't have a project in the loop. So John asked, because the Commission on Recovery and Resilience has been interested in doing a riverfront master plan. He said that if we aren't doing it, he'd like to put in a grant for it, and I'll let him explain
Thanks so much, Mike. And So I'm John Copans. I'm the Executive Director of the Montpelier Commission for Recovery and Resilience. Really appreciate the chance to join you to talk about this tonight. As folks remember, we had a series of big public forums as we were reflecting on the floods of 2023 and really thinking about what comes next for our city. The commission as an organization came out of those forums, and a set of priorities for the community came out of those forums as well. And our sort of three categories of work as we think about what we've been up to as a commission sort of span the scale from really thinking about the watershed as a whole. And, you know, Montpelier's not an island. Our fate is really determined upstream of us when we think about all the water that falls in the watershed and then flows through Montpelier. So we think about the watershed scale. We then also very much think about sort of the downtown scale. Ultimately, we have a downtown that's vulnerable given where it's located. We experienced that intensely in 2023. And so how do we make this downtown more adaptive to future floods? And then finally, we've done work around emergency preparedness and response as well. And what we're talking about today is what we've conceived of as something called the River's Edge Master Plan, which is really to look at our River's Edge as it flows through Montpelier. That's both the North Branch and the main branch of the Winooski, and really sort of re-envisioning what our relationship is to those two waterways. We think, and in fact, I'll remind you, this is one of your strategies incorporated in the city plan, was to do this River's Edge Master Plan. Appreciation for you all for incorporating that into the city plan. But the long and short of it is we feel like the timing is right to really engage the community in this conversation about how we're interfacing with our rivers. You know, an example of the types of decisions we have to make. As you all probably know, when we experienced the 2023 flood, certain households are eligible for a buyout as part of that process. Ultimately, that's a municipal decision about which parcels you want to approve for a buyout and which parcels maybe are not as suitable for buyouts. It is better to have those conversations and really think sort of strategically and geographically about those questions around buyouts before the next flood happens. It's a much tougher conversation to have when you've got people who've suffered really traumatic losses in their household and are, for obvious reasons, really interested in the potential financial solution that's a buyout. But it's a different question for a municipality in terms of what parcels are really appropriate and provide some real public good for buying out, because ultimately those are parcels that will never see development in the future. And so that's the sort of question that a River's Edge Master Plan would explore. It would also think about, you know, we've talked about a couple of dam removals. We have bridges that are real points of constraint for us along the river. We think about how we develop along the river. You know, big news this week about the changing of hands of the RK Miles property, right? The Hunger Mountain Co-op, and already some conversation about, wow, what do we do with that property? Obviously it's theirs and they'll make some decisions about that, but it's also worthwhile for us every time we're thinking about that River's Edge to be thinking about what are the public interests when it comes to allowing the water to spread out and to slow down in a way that doesn't inflict the same kind of damage on our downtown. So that's the long and short of it. We as a commission are excited to work in partnership with the city on this. Ultimately, because it's a municipal planning grant, the city is the applicant, but we're willing and eager, in fact, to do a fair amount of the work in the background. The cap for municipal planning grants is around $30,000 for individual municipalities. This is probably going to cost more than that. So another piece of work for us is to find some additional funds for that. That's something that the commission will be working on as well. But we're very much excited to partner with you as a planning commission on this and with your planning director and staff to take this on. So I think, yeah, happy to answer any questions.
What is the $30 million? Like, what are some of the things that would be helping
Did I say
with?
30 minutes?
Oh,
30,000.
30,000. Okay, 30,000.
Holy
I'm like,
That's
what? Yeah, what?
Yeah, this is gonna be one hell of a plan.
Yeah, ultimately, it's about really hiring in some expertise, some consultants who are, I mean, just to some degree, like you had with the city plan, folks who can really provide the expertise to do that planning work. I mean, one component we'd want to think about is public engagement, because that is as you all know, any planning exercise, public engagement is really critical, really making sure the whole community feels like they've had the opportunity to participate, but also in particular stakeholder groups are going to be, I would say, particularly important for this process. So that's one of the pieces we'll have to figure out, is how much of that public engagement happens. You know, the commission has done some work around public engagement, so we can be a partner in some of that, but sometimes you also bring in some of that expertise to do that work as well.
Okay.
I commend you you guys have been doing a lot of work for a number of years. So thanks for the good work. I'm glad that we're doing this. I feel like $30,000 doesn't go very far when you're thinking about, big engineering questions. And there's also other communities around, as you kind of talk about, right? Like upstream, downstream. So any of the, like, do you have any sense of how much it would really, to really do what we all know needs to be done, how much that really would cost?
I mean, ultimately, well, the grant's capped at 30,000. I think we think it's probably twice that, more like 70 or 80,000 to do. But what we're talking about is a Montpelier specific project.
Yeah.
I mean, we have been doing a fair amount of work at the watershed scale as well, because you really can't do this in an isolated way. And in fact, Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission is taking the lead on another CDBG DR application, which is regional in scope, that would include some modeling of the river, the upper Winooski watershed, and some public engagement across the municipalities that make up the upper Winooski watershed.
So this could marry into that somewhat.
Yeah, I think that they do, because you certainly need modeling as part of what informs decisions. I mean, a perfect example of that is for 5 Home Farmway and the Pioneer Dam removal. Like, ultimately, it was modeling that showed that it was really the dam removal when coupled with the floodplain restoration at 5 Home Farmway where there's real benefit, right? That when you remove the dam, it really added to the benefit of that floodplain restoration. And without a good model, that we wouldn't have known that. And so I don't want to over promise in that this consultant that we're paying 70 to 80,000, they are not doing in-depth sort of hydraulic and hydrologic modeling but there are some other sort of resources when it comes to those types of models.
Yeah, thanks.
This is just a general interest, curiosity question. Are there other River's Edge master plans out there that you all are looking at or have discovered?
There is actually an organization that's national called the Waterfront Alliance, and they have published a guidebook, and I'm going to look at so I get it right. The Waterfront Edge Design Guidelines, WEDG, and that Greg Gossens has been on the commission. He's actually just come off the commission, but Greg pointed us towards that as a really excellent resource and will be a real tool for us and the consultant that we hire in doing this. So there's examples where those guidelines have been applied, not here in Vermont, but in other places. Yeah. You see it some in New York about and like there's other communities that have really figured out how to interface. You know, my mom grew up in Greenville, South Carolina. That's a poster child as a community that really figured out how to interface with their river in a way that made it into an asset as opposed to just sort of this forgotten thing on the side of town. I grew up in Brattleboro that also really suffers from that, right? The Connecticut River is right there, but you just don't even know it when you're in town. I think we have that similar sort of challenge, but also an opportunity.
So is the master plan more about preparing for flooding or like in terms of buyouts and thinking about that? Or is it design and incorporating the river into our town? I guess I'm getting confused about the overarching goal of the master plan.
I think honestly, when we think about our rivers, we should be thinking about all of those pieces. I mean, certainly flood resilience is prominent. That's why I'm here. But the reality is it's an economic resource. It's a recreation resource. And I think it would be a mistake to say it's only about one of those things. I think to me, that's part of how we sort of scope this out and how we talk to the community about it. It's, you know, what do you think about when you think about your rivers? Why do you care about your rivers? Or why are you concerned about your rivers? I think it would probably be a mistake to categorize it too tightly as a flood resilience exercise. I think it needs to be more holistic.
Yeah, I guess I would just go and mention that we actually had an old River's Edge master plan back in the 1990s from Montpelier. And it was part of that planning process that helped create the bike path. How can we get more interactions? That's why the bike path is where it is. It's located in and along over the river with bridges. And so that was one of the outcomes of that plan that Greg was on back in the 90s. And the other thing just to keep in mind, the other comment you had was the master plan and who's doing these. Usually when we use the word master plan, this is why we stopped calling our city plan the master plan, is because really it's a term of art that a lot of landscape architects and planners use. So who you end up hiring for a project like this is probably going to be a team of landscape architects. They'll probably have some specialists on staff who are hydrologists, but you're usually trying to look at the space a little bit with more of a landscape architect's eye. How can we, what does this have to look like to get people to actually get to the river's edge? What do we have to do to the river's edge? How do we ensure the protection of the natural resources that are there? We don't want to obviously go and fill in a whole bunch of endangered wetlands or something in order to get access, but at the same time, how can we make that interaction? Where are the benefits? And so that's what they'll look at, is you're going to have some very urban stretches and you're going to have some rural stretches, and how do we balance those? And I think that's what the architects and the planners, landscape architects, would all work together to try to define that, or basically help the community talk about how we want that to look. And then the question then comes up, okay, how do we make this happen? Because some of this is private property, some of this is public property. Obviously, it's a lot easier for us to look at the state parking lots and say, hey, this is what we should be doing. It's publicly owned. We've got a lot easier chance of making things happen. It's the private property where you're like, okay, how do we, do the garage building on Elm Street behind Julio's? That's private property. So we're going to have to work with a property owner to figure out what would we envision for that space. And we have to understand, when we're envisioning that space, we're envisioning somebody else's property, and they may not be interested in advancing what projects we have. So we have to kind of talk through those potential issues.
I mean, that makes sense. I'll just say that I think that there's a ton of opportunity in Montpelier. I mean, the stretch of state-owned buildings and parking lots, it goes for a ways. Our high school is along there, and then further down you have more state properties. And then there is opportunity also with private. I remember when Bar Hill first came up, and their initial plans had river access for kayak entry and things like that. Confluence Park has been talked about forever. So there's so much opportunity for both access, recreation, and flood resilience. So yeah, I think this is a great process.
Yeah, even that we're removing these dams too,
Right.
like kayak access.
Yeah.
I feel like the river could be an economic driver for our city. And we're currently just like ignoring it and also kind of scared of it. Or it should be the opposite, like we should celebrate it. So I would love to see a master plan.
Do we just need to endorse this? Like, what does it mean for?
A motion to, so officially the municipal plan recommends applying for this. So I guess we would just need a motion to recommend applying for.
So I move that we recommend applying for this municipal what's it called?
Municipal plan.
Municipal planning grant for the
River's Edge.
River's Edge Master Plan.
There we go.
Thank you.
And
Thank
I will second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Oh, okay. Come up and comment.
There's public participation and then there's public participation, as you well know. Some of it is checking a box and other is listening and hearing and adapting the plan to match. I liked the phrase that there's so much opportunity, but then our history is rife with missed opportunities. You know, we built a bike path, but we didn't connect it to the parking lot right below to keep it walkable. So we got 90-year-old ladies trying to drag their groceries up the eroded gravel between the Capitol Plaza parking lot and the bike path. And then similar, 6-foot drop to the Haney lot, which is the one that goes out by Julio's. So there was, I FOIA'd the records request, there was a ramp following that round wall that was designed, and it just disappeared from the design. And there's no public records at all of why or who disappeared it from the design. But it was in our plan to keep the place walkable, and yet missed opportunity, I guess. So let's not tout the opportunities unless we're prepared to follow through on them. But with regard to the Commission on Recovery and Resilience, you need to condition your support for it on a level of transparency. That organization operates their meetings behind closed doors, no public minutes, no public records. And we cannot bless and condone planning of public waterways and public waterfronts behind closed doors. So that's something I've mentioned it to council, but it would be smart for you. You're responsible for engaging the public in planning. So you can't, say, sure, take this and go run with it. Our emergency Maple plan was contracted for behind closed doors, no eyes on the scope of work, no eyes on the shortcomings of it, et cetera. So until we reform or litigate, until the Commission on Recovery and Resilience was created with the city, and yet it believes that it's exempt from public records and open meeting laws. So I would say that if you're going to support this, condition it upon that transparency.
So my question then is, this plan, this River's Edge plan, do you plan to just take it straight to city council after you've created it, or is it going to come to us?
Ultimately, it's actually the city is the applicant for this. So it's actually a little different from the emergency plan in that the city is the applicant, the city would be the recipient. And so we're eager to partner. We're eager to partner in public engagement and support. But ultimately, given that the city is the applicant and really the host for this project, that it would, I think, ultimately probably come before you as a planning commission. I'm not sure about whether it would come before the council as well. Do you have a sense of that?
Usually we'll present them to the commission and to the city council for either acceptance or approval, because we've got to be able to close out those grants. So usually that's a part of the work plan. But
And there are surveillance requirements because it's block grant money, right? So the state's getting updates and.
for this is state money, not federal money.
Right. So, but you have to work with ACCD.
Yeah, and their progress reports.
Right.
And procurement too.
And procurement.
RFPs to hire
Right,
the vendor.
exactly,
All-
yeah.
That's right.
I'm just saying there's other checks and balances.
Yeah, and there'll be there will be this, once it gets through the planning commission, it's going to have to go to city council for approval with the resolution, and at that time they'll have probably developed much more of the work plan and budget that would be going alongside this, so we would see what is included in the work plan.
Okay. Aaron would like to chime in.
Yeah, just a quick question about the kind of the mechanics of the grant. Does the grant have a term In other words, do we have to, if the grant is secured, does the money have to be spent within, say, a year or something like that? I'm just thinking of a situation where, say, John has to get $50,000 to do a retainer for this group to get the work started, and the grant is secured. Does that start some sort of a clock so that, so that John's required to kind of secure $20,000 additional to get that into motion? Or once the grant's secured, it's just there available for them when they get whatever money they need to get the work started.
So yeah, it'll be about it's the grants are 18 months. Usually they go to about May of 27. So if it gets approved. And I think they'll probably have to have some amount of funding secured in some capacity, or very likely. These are very competitive, so I think that'll be part of the challenge. So if they don't have the additional funding, that would probably cost them. If they don't have some very direct line that's like, we may not have the money, but we know exactly where it's going to be coming from in order for ACCD to feel confident about awarding it. Because there's just not enough time to spend 7 months looking for funding and then do an RFP and get somebody on board and do an entire public process. Because most of this grant will be public process. I mean, you're going to have, it's all about coming up with alternative, understanding the issues, and you understand those by having public sessions. It's very similar to what John's been doing all along. You communicate to understand the issues. You go back to communicate to understand what the alternatives are and what direction the public would like. Now that we know this is the issue, there are 3 possible solutions. Which solution would you like? And then in a River's Edge master plan like this, you probably are going to have 5, 6, 7 different zones. And it's like, well, what's going to be our goal for this urban area on the North Branch, which is very different than the urban area on the Winooski, and then the more rural areas on the Winooski.
If they're having trouble executing, they can apply for extensions also after they've been granted.
Not for these. The MPGs, they are very hard and fast on those. Boom, that's it. So other grants you can get that. These guys are very, very punctual on making sure everything is done on time.
So if the city is ultimately the applicant, is that kind of where this partnership comes in, where you are trying to secure this additional funding then? Like that's okay.
Certainly a piece of it. Yeah, that we're already thinking about where those other funds will come from. Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, we still have the motion and second on the table.
Oh, we didn't approve that? I thought we approved it.
We went to comment.
Oh, okay. Do we need, okay. Do we need to?
I guess I
approve
would clarify, just have them revote now.
it? Okay. All right. All right. All those in favor?
I
Aye. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Look forward to working with you all.
All right. Thanks, John. I'll be in touch about getting you into the system.
Sounds good.
Thank you, John. Don't
Okay.
let me forget,
Oh.
Ariana. I'll have to have you sign that.
Oh, okay.
So
Oh, yeah.
before we go,
Before I go. Okay. Number 7, is Meredith gonna? Focus?
nope, I'll be running it.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay.
All right. If everyone doesn't know Meredith Crandall, she's our zoning administrator. And I'm gonna just share my screen. I think this will be the easier way to look at this. We look kind of bluey. Somebody adjusted the.
Yeah.
Can you look at the?
Let me see if I can check the settings.
Do you have to stand on the table?
Yeah.
Or is it more in, it looks like it might actually be in low res.
Yeah.
That's not unfocused, it's low res. It's good online.
Yeah, it's great online. Does that mean that the people viewing on Zoom can see it clearly?
Yeah.
Okay.
I want user.
No.
Maybe slightly better.
Well, we might not be able to use the screen then.
Right, I know that's not seeing. Or maybe you can just zoom in from your computer. It's maybe.
It's, I think for some reason it's one of them, whether it's the laptop that's projecting it, has it set for low resolution.
It's not the laptop, it's that. The laptop here seems fine.
Okay.
Can you make the text spread out to the whole, go full screen?
Yeah, but I'm up here this close. I can tell you, it's just pixels.
Yeah.
So it'll just be big pixels. But
Paper copies?
Yeah, I'm trying that, but I don't think that's the issue.
but
Yeah, it's the pixels up there, right? It's the projector.
all right. Well, I'll let Meredith try to go and work on it a little bit, and I'll start just kind of going through. So what we've been doing for all of the parts that we've been working on is to kind of go through and have a conversation about what is in the existing plan or existing zoning, and what is it that we've heard and we think that we might want to look at making changes. So we really aren't making changes today. We're kind of really highlighting, I think this is an area for us to look at so we can start putting ideas together, putting talking points, discussions together. But a lot of people weren't here when we wrote the zoning regulations, so it's helpful to kind of go through and have a little bit of a presentation of what's actually in the zoning and why it's there. So part two, which is for anyone who is online, you can you'll be able to see it, but section, it starts out really with section of 2001, which talks about establishing base zoning districts and neighborhoods. So in any zoning bylaws, you're going to break your community into various districts, and they're divided up really based on their character, their uses. And so how can we make treat one area different than the other? You wouldn't want to be treating College Street the same way that you would treat Main Street. So you create it as a separate district. And how many and how few districts depend on how much variety you have in your community. And we've got a lot of districts here, and I think there are some opportunities to collapse some of these. And in other cases, I think it's helpful to keep them. And then there's also a related question of, okay, well, maybe the districts are good, but the lines are not necessarily in the right place, and we need to move this line down another intersection to make sure that we're capturing more parcels in a certain zoning district. So the establishment is just establishing those districts and establishing the neighborhoods. And then in 2002, we established the overlay district. So we only have one, but the rules talk about it as if there were more, because we could always add more if we wanted to. But the only overlay district we have is the design control overlay district. And then we have a few legal things to go through: the creation of the official map and the zoning district boundaries. So the zoning district boundaries in 2004 really are things that Meredith needs to have legal justifications. So it goes through and says, if you're looking at boundaries, if it looks like it follows a street or a railroad line or a right of way, then it does. If it looks like it's following a parcel line, then it does. So if for some reason you zoom in on something and the last 4 feet of your property are actually in a different zoning district, they're not. We would interpret it as the map looks like it's following the parcel line, therefore it does follow the parcel line. Or if your parcel line, you resurvey your property line and it's actually 2 or 3 feet farther, the zoning district moves those 2 or 3 feet. You don't get to have a separate zoning district in the back part of your property. And again, anything, if it's following natural features, it follows the natural features. And we just have these in here as the legal basis for how we interpret those zoning maps. When we get to chapter 210, that's when we actually get into the zoning districts. And each one of them is labeled 2101, 2102 on through, and they all follow the same format. There's a purpose statement, which is non-regulatory. It simply describes and outlines what the intent is for that district, and some neighborhood characters. So urban center in this case is consisted of 3 different neighborhoods. And I can pull up the map as well if we wanted to. There is the urban center. Sorry, I should have been scrolling my screen a little bit to keep you guys up. So we have 3. We've got Civic, which encompasses the area that's the capital district over where the State House is. That's part of Urban Center 1. The downtown business district is also, which is most of where we are right now, Main Street, State Street, those areas are in the downtown business. And Elm Street is treated a little bit different. I think we would all agree that Elm Street, by the character, it's kind of its own separate neighborhood, where those larger buildings, the Rocky Cliff, it kind of defines a slightly separate, slightly distinct neighborhood character. Each zoning district, and we'll talk about this separately, figure 215, that is the table of uses. So when we will get to that later on, and that just goes through and says what's permitted and conditionally permitted and not allowed in this district. One of the bigger things, drive-through facilities and drive-in establishments are prohibited except as specifically authorized in 215, which are basically banks. You can have a bank drive-through, but you can't have other drive-throughs. We have dimensional standards, which will be at the end of this, actually at the end of this section. And we'll go over those. And then there's also architectural standards. And the architectural standards only applies if a project is not in design review district. So if it's in design review district, these don't apply, but these are, and I pretty much think almost everything in these areas is in DRC, but it's just put in there just in case something moves. We are still safe that we have some rules to guide, basic requirements of what we would expect. Pedestrian access shall be from the public sidewalks, with street facing principal entrances as follows. So just what you would expect out of a downtown building. And then we have some riverfront standards, which actually would be helpful for John to, some of these, what we were trying to do, what we would eventually do in the future if we had his river master plan done, is we would probably try to incorporate some of those principles into these riverfront standards. It would be a nice way to integrate those. And then that table of dimensions that I mentioned, these are kind of those bulk and massing standards. And every district has a table just like this. So the minimum parcel size is 3,000 square feet. So you can't make any parcel smaller than that. Frontage has to be at least 30 feet if you're going to create a new parcel. Coverage has to be, you can cover it 100%. So you can fully cover a building, a parcel with a building. That includes front setback of 0, side setback of 0, rear setback of 0. The only setback you have is a 10-foot minimum from the water.
Can I ask a question about this?
Yep.
So when these were originally drawn up, what are they based on, right? Is it just the way things sort of looked and the way we want them to look? Are there engineering reasons that they are set up a particular way? Like, what's the rationale behind parcel sizes and setbacks? And
Yep. So those are those go back to a process that we did back when we wrote the regulations in 2015, probably 2016, when we were originally working on those. Our consultant at the time went through and she did a lot of work to put it all together, but did evaluations of all the neighborhoods. So we created neighborhoods first and then found out what are the average setbacks. These are all mostly 0 setbacks or
So it's
5
kind
feet
of based
setback.
on what existed.
It's what existed at the time, but we also made it 90% conforming. So what that means is you might have 20 buildings on a street and 15 of them are 10 feet back, but you might have 5 of them that are just 5 feet from the 5 feet from the front setback. Well, we made it 5 feet. And so therefore there is a lot of room in there for buildings to get bigger and move in those directions, because we were looking at in this case, we would have looked at what is the second, because looking at the top 10%. So if we had 20, we'd actually literally go through the list. We'd line them all up in numerical order, and we go through and say, well, these two, this was 5 foot and this was 6 foot. So we should make it 7 foot because that's where the next one is. And then we would go through and eventually go through and sit down and say, well, it doesn't make sense to have a 7 foot setback. Let's make it 5. And then, or if we're grouping this street with this street with this street, when we add them all together, this one may have been 7, but this one actually makes it, when we add all these neighborhoods, all these streets together, going street by street, it averages out to a different number. So
no, that's helpful. When we were doing the read through, I looked at sort of comparative. I looked at Barry, I looked at, whatever, Shelburne and Berlin. I just wanted to see, like, is there some standard planning? And what you find is that no, there's a lot of different things out there. So that answers that question.
Yeah. And what we had previously was a lot of them that were in the past, planning commissions, and there weren't always professional planning staff that would go through and do a little bit of the homework for communities. So communities a lot of times would go through and say, oh my God, doesn't that community down the road look great? We'll take that zoning and we'll plug it in here. Mm-hmm. Well, in Montpelier, somebody did that, because if you were to look at we had a district that was MDR. We had high density, medium density, and low density residential. So we had 3 residential districts. We now have 6 or so. But when we had 3, if you were to look at the setbacks, I think the results were like 68, 70% of all the buildings in that district were non-conforming, because they were very suburban rules. And it was like, well, you have to have a 20-foot setback. Well, nobody had a 20-foot setback. All the buildings were already at 15 feet. Mm-hmm. So what we did when we did this is all of these went from a 20-foot setback to either a 10 or a 5. Mm-hmm. And so just because we looked at what was on the ground, and yes, we could go through and say, do we want this to change? And if we have areas of towns where we're like, we need to be more transformative, we got to think about this whole section going away and being replaced with something else. And therefore looking at what's on the ground is not valuable or useful. And if that's the case, we should have that conversation. But for the most part, we didn't really have areas of town, except maybe where Gas Lane Alley is, where Domino's, mm-hmm. There are people who kind of go and say that could go away and nobody would be crying, and be replaced with something nice. But outside of that, most people, when they see these neighborhoods, go and say, that's a good neighborhood, might need this, might need that. But the actual bulk and massing kind of look nice. So the rules got much better. We've got them all 90%, 100% compliant now, instead of, 60% non-complying. We're now 90% complying.
I wasn't trying to slow you down. I just was really curious about that. So.
No, it's a good question, because certainly other communities, that is a conversation. People are like, well, I think we should have rules. I think they're doing a good job over there. We should take their rules and plug them in here. And we're saying, no, we actually looked at what's on the ground, and these rules reflect that. Although it's really hard, you're looking at 0 setback, 0 side. But if you're looking across the street, you have, what do you have? You've got the Aubuchon building that abuts up to the sidewalk, 0 setback. It abuts up to the building next to it, 0 setback. and abuts up to the one on the other side, 0 setback. It's just, this is what you would expect for that type of neighborhood.
Mhm.
And as we move forward, Urban Center 2, this area is just one neighborhood. It's Berry Street, what we call Berry Street West. So it's a small set of, it's a smaller area that is right next to downtown. So Guy's Farm and Yard, the church, on the way out a little bit. I can't remember. I guess I can look at. Oh, I can't change screens while I'm sharing. So
Stops at Nelson Street.
stops at Nelson Street. There we go. All right. So it goes out a little ways. This is, one place that could be mixed in with something else, but the rules generally, again, it follows all the same thing. We've got a purpose, a neighborhood character, the uses that are allowed there, the dimensional standards, architectural standards. And again, all of this area is also in design review. So, and riverfront standards. And this one, you'll notice these buildings, there are no what we call block style construction, buildings abutting each other. So we have a 5-foot setback in these districts. Side is 5 foot. Rear is 10 foot and water is 20 foot. So these again reflect what's on the ground. The parcel sizes are bigger on this street. They're about 6,000 square feet. Minimum frontage is about 60 feet. Coverage can be 90%. You've got to have some green space. We're not asking for a lot, but expect to have some. Floor area ratio. We didn't talk about this on the other one. Floor area ratio is just really, it's a different way of looking at density. So we have 2 density rules. And if we go to the 2 more, you'd end up, you got residential densities that will tell you can have 1 unit per 3,000 square feet of parcel. So you have those densities. We've talked about those. And that tells you how many dwelling units you're allowed to have. When we're talking about commercial, a commercial isn't a dwelling unit. So how much floor area can I have? And the floor area ratio is basically looking at how big is your parcel. You have a 10,000 square foot parcel. How much commercial can you have? Well, you actually can have 30,000 square feet because it's a 3.0 max. So obviously you'd have to go up and have a 3 or 4 story building to maximize your commercial, whether you're talking office, retail, anything non-residential would all be in that category. So you'd have to obviously go up if you've got a 3.0 to have multi-story to take advantage of it all. But again, these are all really generous numbers to try to allow things to happen. We probably don't have a lot of 3.0 out there because there's a number of single story buildings, but it certainly could accommodate it. Maybe the 3.0 would come in if we start looking at the senior center in the old high school next to it, where TW Wood and those galleries are. Those might be in that area of a 3.0 floor area ratio. And again, this has minimum height of 24 feet, maximum height of 55 feet. So this could support large infill buildings in that part of Berry Street. Urban Center 3 looks at the upper part of Main Street. Again, only one neighborhood, but again, the character of, you think about the area from the library up to the roundabout. It's got a distinct character. We could combine Urban Center 2 and Urban Center 3, but that's really a distinctly different neighborhood character than Berry Street, where we've got Guy's Farm and Yard, single story. Buddy's is a historic building, but not to the scale of what you have in that other side. So it's just, we could combine those, but we did them separately because we felt they were distinct enough in character. And again, in this side, you see the parcels are actually 9,000 square feet. And although the numbers seem to be getting up, you're like, wow, up 9,000, that's less than a quarter acre. So it's still really small lots that are allowed, 60-foot minimum, 80% coverage, 15-foot setbacks from the front, 10 feet from the side, 10 feet from the rear. So again, the setbacks are a little bit, the buildings are a little bit bigger, but they're also set back a little bit more. Riverfront, and I'll go much quicker through these now. Riverfront is, this is an area where we've recommended as staff that there be a change. You've got Berry Street, the rest of Berry Street, Route 2, and what we call the Crossroads, what I always refer to as Gasoline Alley. I really think the Crossroads needs to be its own zoning district. We just can't go and really, if we just separated Urban Center 2 and Urban Center 3 because the buildings are so different, it's really hard to go and say the gas stations, Domino's Pizza, Cumberland Farms are of the same character or similar enough character to Berry Street that they should be lumped together. And that just doesn't make sense. And I think some of the conversation we had at the time was that the community wanted this area to change, the Crossroads neighborhood to change to be more like those other neighborhoods. I think there's a little question of a reality check in there if we really expect that to be making any significant change. But that's one worth thinking of. But Berry Street East and Route 2 do have very similar building. They're mostly residential, mostly multifamily, mostly historic. We do have Stonecutters Way, which tends to be different from that. So do we have Berry Street, Route 2, and a separate district for Stonecutters Way out through the Caledonia Spirits? So, but those are just questions, things we could, right now they're all lumped in as one, and that's fine. We also could lump some of these into, is it the next one? No, next ones are gateways, but there's also a mixed use residential district, which we might be able to just go through and say, Berry Street's really mixed use residential. We don't have to make a special grouping for it. It just happened to be in the old zoning that these areas were riverfront. And we kept that designation, we kept that area roughly. And so it's more of a historical thing that was kept. Eastern Gateway, just to quickly roll through these, so we've got them all on the table for conversation, think about Route 302 and Route 2 and a little bit of that Gallison Hill area. So that's your Eastern Gateway. You're talking about car dealerships and Tractor Supply and the Cabot and the other areas that are, over in Farm and Factory. And again, this is where some things come in, the architectural standards, because they're not in design review. These may be things to look at, but we like to have a certain amount of design in some of these gateway areas to ensure that the area looks good. But we can talk about those in a little bit more detail when we review them. Parcel sizes are now much bigger. We're talking 20,000 square feet. Building footprint size and height. Now there's a 40,000 square foot max. So you can't, this is to kind of help put a curb on big box retailers. So you can have a 40,000 square foot, but Walmarts and super Walmarts can be 120, 180, 200,000 square foot. I mean, they can be gigantic buildings. If we want to not allow that scale of building, then we've got the footprint cap. Western Gateway, similarly, just on the other side, we're talking about the high school, Department of Labor, and those buildings out in that direction. Again, some architectural standards. Things are starting to shorten up. You can see the architectural standards are fewer. Dimensional standards, we still have them. Mixed use residential, that's the one I had mentioned before. So we've got a couple of these areas that have a mix of uses. The community college, out on Elm Street. There's community college and a couple of daycares or a daycare. So that was considered a mixed use neighborhood. Court Street is mixed use. College Hill, East State Street. So think about East State Street going up. That all used to be medium density residential, I think, and everybody was non-conforming. So you can have non-conforming structures, which we fixed. You also have non-conforming uses. And by putting these areas into a district that allowed a mix of uses, so residential and small commercial, meant that the college itself was not a non-conforming use anymore. There's also one on Lower East State Street. So if you're thinking about Birch Grove Bakery, whatever that.
Elm Street.
Elm Street.
Yeah, you're talking Elm Street.
Yeah, Elm
Which
Street.
Grove's out of Elm, sorry, I thought you
Yeah.
said Lower East State.
Oh,
You do.
oh, Lower East State. There is also one as you go through that's also out the meadow. That's on Elm Street. So,
Northfield
Yep.
Street.
so we've got Northfield Street, Redstone, School Street, Lower East State Street. So those are all neighborhoods. We've got a lot of these neighborhoods which had a mix. So rather than just allowing this in the meadow as a conditional use, we went through and said it's allowed in this area and not allowed in this area. So, and then we get to all of our residentials, and these were all really based on looking at those zoning rules. Residential 1.5, which is residential 1,500. So you need to have 1 unit per 1,500. And if you're trying to do the math in your head, I think that was about the 28 units.
I'm sorry.
Yes. About 28 units per acre. So that's about 20. So that gets you an idea of what that looks like. But other than that, residential 1,500 has a parcel size of 3,000. So other than that density, it's pretty close to a residential 3,000. So this is one of those districts, I think Gay was talking about, can we collapse some of these districts? Absolutely, residential 1,500 can be combined with residential 3,000. They are very, very similar. We can go through and combine those together into one because most of the information here in the figure are very, very much the same. The only difference was the density was 1 dwelling unit per 1,500 instead of 1 dwelling unit per 3,000. Which now that we allow 6 units per parcel kind of washes everything out. You're just, it doesn't really matter. So that's an option. So again, your residential for people, as I'm giving everyone motion sickness, your residential 1,500 is there's near Blanchard Park, Franklin Street and Liberty Street have areas that are 1,500. And your 3,000s are College Hill, up near College Hill South, Franklin Street again, Liberty Street, Main Street, River Street, Prospect Street. These are all areas that are residential 3,000. The Meadow, Heaton Street, Country Club Road, residential. So we actually have some area zone Country Club Road for Res 3,000. And then the Res 6,000, now we're getting into more of your residential neighborhoods. Berlin Street, you know, as you're going up the hill on Berlin Street, that's all Res 6,000, College Hill, and Redstone. So if you're out that way, those are all residential 6,000. So again, you're really looking at 7 units an acre, about 1/8 acre lots. So these are more standard, typical owner-occupied housing. We allow a lot of other infill to happen. You can put 2, 3, 4 units in it. The reality is at this point, most of these are single-family duplexes at most. Your residential 9s, you're starting to move out. Now we're talking about Cliff Street, Crestview, Elm Street, Again, all sewer and water. These are Elm Street parts that are on sewer and water. Gallison Hill, that has sewer and water, so that's all Res 9. Murray Hill. North Street has a section that's Res 9. So these are Northfield, Stonewall Meadows, Town Street, Toy Town, College Pasture, Town Hill. So these are all areas that really have much lower density. Now we're out to quarter-acre lots. So really, you have to be thinking about Isabel and Hebert and up on, the classic would be Town Hill. You drive out Town Hill Road. The lots are much bigger. You have much more lawn. So those are the Res 9 areas. So the question is, how do you start to combine some of those if we wanted to? The final one is urban residential, or pretty close to the last one is urban residential. This was designed specially for Country Club Road, and it really was kind of a flexible placeholder that said we've got approximately 17 acres of the lower front Country Club Road where the actionable master plan calls for housing in a future community center, desires to allow for flexibility in how it's designed and laid out. Proposed development should promote pedestrian-oriented designs, blah, blah, blah. So again, we're thinking with more urban rules, and just kind of left things as flexible as we could be for developers to be able to come in. And I think, rural. And we'll get to James in a second. So rural lands is anything that doesn't have sewer and water. So that's what we like to go and say, why is this area rural? It's rural because it doesn't have sewer and water. And so we have a number of areas that don't have it and probably won't. They're very, very low likelihood of extending sewer into these areas.
Oh, I just noticed there's a hand up on the Zoom.
Yeah. That's
Oh.
James. I'm one district away from being done, so I figured
okay.
I would just get
Okay.
through the last. But so we've got a number of these rural districts, and then they have a 2-acre minimum. The reason why they have a 2-acre minimum is because you have to have on-site septic. On-site septic and an on-site well generally require at least a separation of to have separation needs 2 acres. And then there's a municipal district that we're going to eliminate because we really need to combine it. It just identifies a bunch of municipal parcels separate from the neighborhoods they're in, and we really should just lump them in. But I guess we'll go to James first. Can he unmute himself?
Can you hear me?
Yes. All right.
Fantastic. Thanks for putting this together and having this conversation. I think this part of our zoning regulations creates kind of some of the biggest opportunity in front of us, and also the biggest current challenge. Just to update the Planning Commission, as you all know, I was tangentially involved in trying to move forward 4 housing units on Heaton Street, though with Down Street. That has been appealed ultimately to the environmental court and possibly beyond that. In part, they're trying to make an argument that it should be a major site plan. And I believe that is the crux of their argument, is to try and get it into major site plan so that they can access a bunch of these rules about character of neighborhood and argue against the project. Secondly, we were working on a 4-unit quadplex on Town Hill in Res 9000. And that administrative zoning approval has been appealed to the DRB and can be appealed from there to the environmental court and can be appealed from there to the Vermont Supreme Court. Both of those could spend years in court. And because, in part, the city decided not to move forward with the growth center encompassing our Res 9000 areas and instead waiting for the Tier 1A and Tier 1B to move forward later next year, hopefully, we cannot apply to move any additional projects forward in Montpelier without triggering Act 250. And that is not viable. And we've started looking at doing development in other communities. So even though we have other parcels in Montpelier that we very much want to develop. And I think that the crux of the challenge is that while this is the planning commission, and I would hope that our plan is more forward-looking, all of these regulations are based on what's on the ground now, looking backwards. And I think that creates, and even you get into even these architectural standards get down to like, you have to have windows every 20 feet and so on and so. There's just so many hooks for anyone to object to that they can say something's wrong with it. Which makes it really, really challenging for developers to look at Montpelier and say, yeah, that's a community where I think I've got a path forward to do something. So I would encourage the Planning Commission to not look at like all of these neighborhood descriptions, because even in the appeal on Town Hill, that person is all about, the character of the neighborhood and what's there. And, they feel like it should be exactly that. And that sentiment, although it's not supported with the regulations, we didn't have to apply to, neighborhood standards with a minor site plan and administrative approval. That sentiment is there in our zoning regulations, telling people that, hey, what's there is what we want there. And if this looks different or you think this is different, then it shouldn't be there. So I would encourage you to throw all of this out, for lack of a better path forward, and start over with like, what do you want in our community? And say, we want mixed use residential, and we want buildings to be able to be over 35 feet tall, and we want smaller setbacks, and we want like some of those density numbers that Mike listed are really problematic when you start thinking about the goals that you all put forward and the vision for our city and developing. If we want to bring on 75 new units a year, that's going to require us to have something different than is on the ground right now. And our zoning regulations are not geared towards that. They're geared towards, we want it to look the same, and we want it to be the same density, and we want it to, we tweaked, around the edges, and now we're 90% compliant with what's on the ground. I think if we went to many, many, many fewer districts and many, many, many fewer neighborhoods and said, we want small businesses, we want, you think mixed use residential, we want coffee shops, we want multifamily housing, we want all of this in all of the parts of town where we have municipal services readily available. And we want to think about, expanding our municipal services to serve more areas within our community. Then I think we're talking about an exciting forward-looking vision. So I think this is a ripe area to make much bigger changes than I think are being contemplated right now by staff. And I appreciate the chance to comment.
Thanks, James.
Okay. Zachary, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I have some general comments, and I also wanted to build a little bit on what James was just speaking to. I've been attending Planning Commission meetings periodically over the last 6 to 12 months, and I'm very thankful with the progress that you all made on the city plan, and as well with some of the subsequent low-hanging fruit zoning regulation changes that you've made in the past several months. I'm very pleased that you're continuing to work on zoning regulation, because I think it will be fundamental in the success of the goals that you've outlined in the city plan. Just one small part, as Mike really neatly laid out all of the different zoning districts. I really appreciate the level of detail and description of neighborhood character. And this is the part where I want to build on James a little bit. To me, the zoning regulation should be fairly binary. Individuals, whether it's a person building a single family home or a large scale developer building downtown, I think in large part should be able to look to mostly the dimensional standards and the use standards and have a pretty clear idea of whether or not they are in compliance. I think the neighborhood descriptions and quality of neighborhood aspects are really beautifully articulated, but I think they do give individuals a false sense that we're trying to maintain things as they are and not be forward thinking when we look ahead and progress as a community. I know tonight you all are mostly interested in getting an overview of the various zoning districts. And so I just have some general comments about that. As a building professional, I've navigated the zoning process on behalf of clients and also as a local property owner. And in my experience, the level of detail and the number of districts in our regulations seem to be out of scale with the needs of our community with, less than 8,000 residents. What may have been intended to provide clarity, I think, has created a maze of technical distinctions that are tedious for applicants and to interpret and also laborious for staff to administer. Excessive zoning divisions can unintentionally discourage the very types of projects our town needs most, as James just pointed out, like infill development and smaller scale missing middle housing options like duplexes and quadplexes. I'm not saying that they can't be done, but I think they are complicated by the zoning regulations as they stand. These are forms of housing that fit well within our existing neighborhoods and can provide more attainable options for local families. But when the code fragments residential districts into too many categories, it limits flexibility. It creates unnecessary variance requests and adds costs and delays that can make these projects financially unfeasible. The complexity of our current system also opens the door to the weaponization of the appeals process, where technicalities can be used to stall or block otherwise reasonable projects. A simplified, quantitative zoning framework would reduce this potential by making requirements clearer, more predictable, and less open to subjective interpretation. Importantly, aligning our zoning code with the goals of the city plan require that we remove barriers to the types of development that the plan envisions. Consolidation, which is what you guys are talking to some extent about tonight, will make it easier to deliver the housing variety, neighborhood vitality, and smart land use that the city plan calls for, while also, and this is important, I think, broadening our tax base and all of the municipal services that we're seeking. Consolidating our zoning districts would not only streamline that development process, but also encourage thoughtful growth that supports housing diversity, efficient land use, and a stronger local economy. I think in a town of our size, simplicity will really be an asset moving forward, and we should strive for a zoning regulation code that is clear and predictable and proportionate to our community scale. Thanks for getting this conversation moving. I'm eager to see where you all take it next. Thanks for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you both.
All right, so before I kind of respond to a couple of those, I want to go through the next, which is actually the last piece of our conversation, which is the use table. And the reason why I want to talk about this is the use table, it has the uses on the left and the different districts across the top. And so where something is a P, it's a permitted use. And where something is a C, it's a conditional use. And where there's a line, it means it's not allowed. So you can't do multifamily units more than 5 units in the rural lands on a single parcel. You can do 1 to 4, and we're probably going to go through and adjust this. We've already have it marked in that because we allow up to 6 automatically, that this should actually read 1 to 6 dwelling units, and multifamily would be 7 to 14 and 15 or more. So we actually have multi-unit split into 2 different sections The reason for that is small multi-unit, we have as permitted uses all the way across, except it's not allowed in rural. And mixed unit of 15 or more units start to kick in as a conditional use in these upper districts. Now, what's the difference between the permitted and the conditional use? One is the permitted uses are administrative. We can issue them in-house. If it's in design review, it might have to have a design review, but it is an administrative permit. And conditional use has a couple of things that go on with it. If it's a conditional use, it goes to a hearing, which means neighbors get noticed. But really what it is and this is set up in statute, is there are only a handful of things that conditional use looks at. You can add more things. We have left it as the minimum, which is 3 items of community facilities. Will the conditional use have an impact on community facilities? That's almost always no. It's not impacting our schools. It's not impacting our police station. It's not impacting our fire department to have another multi-unit. So that's almost always a no. Where it usually comes in is character of the area and traffic. So the reason why we chose the number 15 is where you start to need a traffic study. And so that's why, and even those, if you want to do more than 15 units and you're in Riverfront, Urban Center 1, 2, or 3, you don't have to do the traffic study. You don't need the conditional use. That's automatically okay. But as you get to Eastern Gateway, if you want to do a 20-unit building, then we're going to ask you for the traffic study. So for the most part, residential development, if you're doing anything less than 14 units, those won't need to meet character of the area. And we're also talking about later on about removing these from major site plan as well, which would also then mean they wouldn't need other requirements as well. So the reason we have those descriptions, and we can certainly go through and amend those, is that
Can I just throw one more thing out there? Because you probably address it in your same comment.
Yep.
Somewhat related. I think, as I follow a bunch of these appeals, and there was a case in South Burlington. I don't know, it's 250 units or something, but appeal to the Supreme Court 3 years later. I mean, it's totally unfounded, right? It's a bunch of the neighbors got together and threw in the legal fees, and they, took this developer, and who knows how much money it cost, and slowed everything down for like 3 years, but they lost, and it's going to be built. But I feel like there are some challenges with the process of appeals that are sort of out, like people can make an argument about anything and there's no recourse, right? And so to me, it's like, even if you stripped everything out, they could still find some reason. They make up a story, whatever it is. And they could, try to wear out a developer, right? We have really awesome people who are trying to build in our community, and we want them to build, but they could try to wear down James and Zach and say, well, we're just going to chase this all away. We're going to take it 3 years. I mean, we had it with the hotel project, right? I mean, it went so far that it's like Hilton says, you know what, it's not worth our time anymore or money. So, I mean, maybe you can address that while you're talking about the other things, because I'm not sure that regardless of we add or to try, I mean, I know that, yes, this can be weaponized, but they can always find, my feeling is they can always find something. And that's more of a state legal.
So it's a state legal issue and the ability to appeal and the ability to just to throw anything at these the neighbors have a lot of power to be able to make these arguments. So like I said, there are a number of these appeals. Many of these appeals get discussed and they're appealed on items that are not even applicable. So you'll get appeals and it's like, well, this doesn't meet the character of the area. And you're like, it's not even a requirement, but there we go. But that one piece will get chucked out early, but usually they'll appeal over a handful of things and some of them will get thrown out. But our goal is always to be writing decisions, because Meredith has to write them, whether they're an administrative site plan or something by the DRB. We want to be able to write things that are defensible and will stand up in court. that means we're doing a good job with our rules. We aren't, they may be complicated, but if anyone has a project, you contact Meredith, she'll help you through it. But they're somewhat necessarily complicated because of the community that we live in. I was in a meeting, see, this is Monday, so it would have been last week, with Miro Weinberger and the housing group that is going around the state, his housing group. And, he was just amazed at the number of kind of the housing appeals and how big of an issue that is for Montpelier. And it just is. It's one of those things, people hear about it and it just becomes part of the way things are done. It's just, this doesn't happen in Barry and this doesn't happen in other communities. So they can maybe get away, skate through with less detailed regulations, because in Barrytown, they're not going to appeal your application. So it's not going to go to a court and have a judge say, this is being thrown out for vagueness. The appellant is going to win based on the fact the regulations are vague, sending it back to the town. And our rules, when they go to court, generally have always stood up. And we're kind of proud of the fact that, can we do things to make it better, faster, more efficient? But one thing we don't want to do is get ourselves into a position where we're actually making it easier for the appellants to win because our rules aren't doing a good enough job. And that's what the character of the area, that's what those neighborhood descriptions are. Maybe we can do better jobs with those neighborhood descriptions. Not saying they're great. We can always look at them, make sure that they do reflect that future vision. But in some cases, they don't, they're not going to be applicable for most of the housing projects. They're mostly going to be coming in, as we're talking about, certain large congregate living and certain large multifamilies. And as you go through the table, it goes through lodging, commercial. And you see, as you get into some of these ones here, automobile repair and service isn't allowed in urban center 1, 2, or 3. It's a conditional in riverfront. It's permitted in Eastern Gateway. So all these lists of potential uses are all here. And so we need to have conditional use because we need to be able to look at whether something would have an impact on that neighborhood. And that neighborhood is important because the neighborhood, a warehouse in the farm and family in Eastern Gateway probably is probably a permitted use. Yeah, it's a permitted use because it's expected that it would be there. But in Western Gateway, we might want to have a say about how big it is, or some of the other issues, some of the other things we can condition permits on. So that's what the last piece is, and this is the last of this section. We're not going to get into 220, which is the overlay and design review. We'll talk about that on a different week. But this I wanted to give you just the overview of what's included, and I'll stop sharing right now, of what's in part 2. And it's mostly these zoning districts and those sets of standards. Can those standards, and this has happened in almost every update since 2018. We've gone through and changed densities, district lines. These can be moved and can be combined, and I think there are opportunities out there. I agree with Zach and James. There are opportunities out there, and we can continue to refine these. And I don't think we should, and it'd be my opinion, have architectural standards on those smaller projects. I think Gabe had a project that he did that was a 3-unit that had to go through the major site plan, and he had to go through architectural standards. And I think at that time I was surprised to see that one had to. It seemed like a pretty small project.
That was steep slopes though, so it was a little different.
Yeah, it had some other things with it, but there was still that the major site plan still came in, and you're like, do we want to? And that's a question for you and for the public and everybody else, is how much do we want to get into designing the 3-plex and the architectural standards, or do we really want to go through and say that there hasn't been an issue that has come up with those from a design standpoint? Some of these rules came out because of design issues other projects. You know, you get burned with a federal building and suddenly you have design review districts and you have the replacement for city center. It's almost a good building. It just needed if it had a few architectural features, city center would be a beautiful building, but it missed it, didn't have the caps. And that's what the architects are like. All you got to do down here is make sure if it's more than this height, it's got to have a cap on it. It's got to have windows. It's got to have a certain amount of glass. You don't want to have 400 feet of brick. You want to have windows and have that interaction with the pedestrian space. And if you go cities to cities, you can look and find which ones work, which ones don't. That's why we have them. It's not really to pick on the person building the duplex. It really is meant for these other opportunities. And we were able to, for Caledonia Spirits, we required them to have that larger building. It had to be more than 24 feet minimum. So even though they wanted a warehouse, single kind of low level, it actually ended up architecturally to make that they put the peak in and they put the mezzanine so that way it's got that larger feel. Even though it's still a single story building, it looks like a multi-story building. So architecturally it looks better. And that was really one of the outputs of, I think it was built under the previous zoning, but it was still had some of those standards.
For me, there's like still this disconnect of what I'm hearing from the public comment from like James about, hey, it was like only a couple units and there was public input and, you know, it's kind of like the character of the neighborhood was one of the reasons that things are getting derailed. But then there's like an explanation of like, well, you know, if it's less than 15 units and that really like maybe shouldn't be part of a reason to derail the project. And I'm just like, I guess I'm hearing like from the public comment that like, hey, character of the neighborhood, all of these very fine detailed regulations are a stumbling block. And then in the meeting, I'm hearing, you know, actually the detailed regulations are helpful and it's preventing like people to have a solid reason to dispute things. So I feel like I'm just hearing two separate, I don't know, like arguments that are arguing opposite things. I don't know how to make sense of that.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I wanted to say, I think that the character, I think that when James has his hand up, I think that one of the concerns is that in the future, that the character of neighborhood could be brought up. That I don't think that was part of the initial appeals process. That then goes to the state, and then people could potentially in the future point to character of the neighborhood. But I also want my bigger point was sort of around like, you know, setting parameters, but also like setting the tone. And I wanted to point to Zach's what he said was a sort of a false sense of forward thinking. Like the tone of the character of neighborhood paragraphs really is like, this is how it is currently, suggesting this is how it should be in the future too. So there is a culture in Montpelier of sticking to the norm, putting the brakes on. And I'm curious, I am personally interested in helping to change that cultural view. I think one of the ways that we can start to do that is through the language of the zoning documents. I'm just going to read this briefly for here in the Meadow. The neighborhood continues to have historic appeal. These regulations are intended to protect the residential scale and character of the neighborhood created by the primarily residential use, historic building stock, front yards, porches, and walkable tree-lined streets. It's like, okay, that represents what the Meadow has been for how many decades? Is that our vision for the Meadow in the future? And I would argue that it is not our vision, because we have said 1,500 housing units in the next 20 years in Montpelier. So I think that every single neighborhood is likely to change. I think there needs to be a cultural shift. And I think we can help that cultural shift with language in the zoning regulations.
I have a question about like something that you said, that how Montpelier is distinct from Barry and other our neighbors. And I'm wondering if the planning department has statistics that point in that direction. Do we know how many projects have been appealed in the past year? How many projects have been proposed and how many of those projects have been appealed?
It's always tough to tell because there's a number that just they don't actually end up getting appealed because a neighbor will come across and say, I'm going to appeal your project. And they just come in and drop the project before it actually gets appealed. And we know of a couple of those. You know, Sibley Street never actually was appealed. It was dropped before. North College Street was just dropped because of neighbor threatening appeal.
Do you know how many are like actually appealed?
In your time, what are we at? 4? 4-ish? It's a low number. It's not a lot, but
Residential development appeal was the hotel was not.
the hotel, yeah, the hotel was.
I think any development.
So parking garage, moving the barn, the access for the solar panels. That's getting appealed to the DRB. I'm
Heat
trying to
Street just got appealed.
Heaton Street just got appealed. So those are for new development, you're talking really 3. Because the solar access in the garage or the barn moving are different kind of categories. I think those are and
Sibley and North College Street.
those were
they've been-
before me.
Yep,
Well, North College Street didn't get appealed.
didn't get appealed.
No, all they came in for was sketch plan review, and it got killed at sketch plan because of a threatening to appeal if they got their permits. So they never even applied for the actual permits.
So what like percentage?
Which one was
It's a low
College
percentage,
Street,
but
planned
it's
unit
enough.
development.
It's enough. You know, if you go back in the past, it's just the reputation. Savings Pasture was appealed.
I'd be curious if it's a low percentage or if it's a low number. But my sense is that there aren't that many proposed developments. I don't see a lot of construction happening.
So if you're talking new buildings, then yes, if you're talking percentage of all the permits we issued, it's a small percentage. If you're talking percentage of, because there's lots of things where we just convert, things are getting converted, but for new buildings, new construction, new buildings, new construction that are big, then yes.
Yeah.
I mean, there haven't been a lot that got approved. I mean, Isabel Circle, it was the subdivision that got approved.
Sure.
The actual permit for the building didn't get.
These types of projects, these quadplexes, a 6-unit, even a single
haven't had
family
them.
home. Yeah, I think that part of the reason that we don't have them is because of the cultural threat to appeal. It's like sort of built into the community at this point. I think that Mike was speaking to that. And I do think that the language in our zoning regulations also speaks to that. Unfortunately.
Yeah, when I told my husband about the latest purchase of property of the co-op buying the RK Miles lot, he looked at me and he said, "Is the only thing that we can build in this town parking lots?" And I said, "Maybe." You know, could it happen across? I brought up the Dunkin' Donuts thing. I know that's my favorite project. Where we are tearing down functional buildings and putting in a parking lot.
It was a garage.
I took my car there. It was functioning. It was like a useful place where you could get services, and now it is somewhere where you can park to get a latte, I guess.
I would say I would be happy to upzone just about every single zone that we have here in town. Every res district get bumped up in its density. I would be thrilled.
Yeah, I mean, I would really want to go through this. My preference would be to go through this chapter or this part, kind of district by district, and look at all of these definitions and what we can like envision for the city. I think a lot of looking at these maps, it's too bad we don't have the maps up here.
I can put them.
I can share them if you want. I've got the electronic one.
Some aspirational language you could insert into most of these neighborhoods, right? That just says, and we moving to the future, we expect to have many small infill multifamily building, whatever.
Yeah.
You need an English professor, right? But it's like, you could put something and just say, look, yes, this does describe what's there.
Yeah.
And that's great,
Mhm.
but we know it's gonna change.
Yeah. And
Or you could delete it all too. But it sounds like.
All right,
the
so
case-
but one,
Well, it's
the one
required
reason,
concerns.
the one reason we have the descriptions in here goes to, again, back to the legal justifications for the conditional use. You need to have a certain amount of detail to avoid that void for vagueness that comes up in courts. Is you have to meet the character of the area. And the first thing the court or the DRB or the judge, whatever's going to say is, what's the character of the area? So that's the reason we have all these different neighborhoods, rather than, we could just have a character of the neighborhood for the entire zoning district. But I think people would go through and say, yeah, but my neighborhood, I live on Cliff Street, and my neighborhood's nothing like that other neighborhood, except for the fact that my parcel sizes are the same size. And so that's why the neighborhoods, there's a little history of why the neighborhoods are there and why we have that description, is so that way we've got something we can point to and say, that's the character. Now, getting to your point, it doesn't necessarily say the character of the neighborhood could be, we expect this to be, 4 stories and 0 lot lines. And we expect this to transition over time into this new neighborhood.
Yeah.
And that would be a perfectly fine character of the neighborhood definition as well. The other place that character of the neighborhood comes in, which Meredith would probably point out at some point, is it's also in our subdivision regulations, which we're going to talk about getting it out of, because character of the neighborhood for the subdivision doesn't make any sense at all. So we'll talk about getting that out, which is the other place that it shows up. But I think we need some of these, but I think the question of rewording, if you want to dive in, what we would probably focus on is looking at the use table. And if we've got a neighborhood like residential 3000, and we go through that use table and everything is permitted except for one thing, that's really that one thing that's a conditional use. That's when we would go over and say, okay, this one letter C is the only thing that's going to apply to this. So let's make sure this addresses that use, because that's what we're talking about. Because the character of a single family home is never going to need to meet the character of the area requirement, or a duplex or a 6-plex or a 14-plex will never have to meet that requirement because it's a permitted use. And that criteria will never come into effect. And therefore we really should, and for the people who want to make things shorter, it really might help us be able to go through and condense some of these to go through and say, we're talking about an awful lot of what the housing stock looks like in character of the area, but the housing stock will never be a conditional use. So let's really start to take some of these pieces out and focus on those things that are important to character of the area, because those are actually conditional uses.
So conditional use comes into play when, neighborhood characteristics come into play when conditional use is the consideration.
Yes.
Yeah.
And currently that's only in 2 places, conditional uses and subdivisions. And it's already on our acts list too.
In subdivisions.
In
Because
subdivisions.
I don't believe, we'll double check, but it is not a required review in subdivisions.
Yeah.
It's just, I think it had been in subdivision before 2018 and it got kept in.
And most subdivisions can be regulated by their dimensions. So if you meet the dimensional requirements, then you're okay.
So it can still get appealed. Absolutely. That's a state level thing. But when we come back to the zoning regulations, it should go through.
Yeah.
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 You're still having to pay the legal costs.
Of course.
Our hope is that we work with the legislature to either limit appeals
for sure,
or to find a way that they can much more rapidly be able to review and adjudicate these and send them back. So that way it's not a 2-year process, that when somebody files a frivolous appeal, you can actually go through and say, wait a second here. At the end of the day, the parking garage reached a point where the only thing that could be litigated were the number of trees on the street. because it was a municipal project, municipal exemptions apply. And because municipal exemptions apply, all these things go away. The only thing that was left were the trees. But that doesn't stop them from continuing the appeal. At a certain point, there's got to be
hundreds of thousands, if not, I think maybe $1 million of.
we put $1 million into it, but that included design costs and engineering and all the pieces. So
James's hand has been up.
Yes.
for a
And-
while.
Just saying, and it's also 7:30. Oh,
Oh, yeah.
do you have something more to say, Tim?
No,
Okay.
I-
That's gonna.
sorry, it's one other thing I was
Okay.
gonna say. It was sorry, is that Meredith did have her hand up earlier. I don't know if you got to say what you wanted to.
Mike got there.
Got it.
So
Okay, great. Well, if it's okay, let's have James make his comment and then I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
That's good.
Thanks. I just wanted to inject. I think the appeals issue is definitely one where the state will weigh in with part of the solution if it is addressed. However, I also would ask that you all consider what the municipality can do. You know, we heard John Copans earlier talk about, wow, you know, a $30,000 grant, and that was kind of a big deal and so on and so forth. My guess is the Heaton Street appeal or the Town Hill appeal, either of those, if they go through the entire process up to the Vermont Supreme Court, both of them could easily cost the community $10,000, $20,000 in Meredith's time, Mike's time, and hired lawyers. And that's just on taxpayers. That has nothing to do with the expense that the developer would face trying to defend what is a permitted use. It is a permitted, both of those are permitted projects. And I think that one thing that you all could raise as part of this is a proposal or a conversation with City Council on frivolous appeals or just appeals period, and say, look, we need the fees to at least cover municipal expenses. And if somebody wants to appeal a housing project, they need to put up the money and put it in escrow. And if they win, by all means, they get all but $500 of it back. But if they lose, right now, there's no cost to the person who's appealing. All of that cost is borne by taxpayers in Montpelier and borne by whoever's put the proposal forward. And I think you all could change that conversation at the local level and not just point to the state. That's all. A little food for thought before you adjourn. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Anyone want to make a motion?
I'll move to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
Okay, all those favor?
Hey.